Hi, I'm Allan Zander. I'm particularly pleased to come and talk to you all today. I'm the treasurer of CMG, as well as being involved with Data Kinetics and Omnovos. Omnovos is a spin-off, actually, from Data Kinetics. Data Kinetics is a 40-year-old company that does primarily performance and optimization for large-scale financial systems. We've got the #1 and the #2 in every major financial vertical using our products today, 7 of the top 10 banks, and a number of other great customers as a result. But I'm really going to spend a fair amount of time talking about digital transformation and how that actually relates to customer and customer engagement. A lot of the technology that we developed actually came from mainframe technology and rules-based processing and considering the impacts of performance and optimization. And we then actually sort of took that in a little bit of a different direction and applied that to digital transformation and retail. And in so doing, we learned a lot about how customers, Omnovos' customers, were thinking about shopping and the shopping experience associated with that. So I'm going to spend a fair amount of time talking to you about that. But as I mentioned before, I am the treasurer of CMG, so I want to put a little bit of a plug in there as well. I very much encourage you all to please be part of the conversation. I loved what Brian actually said earlier about CNN moments and the impact of you don't want things to escalate to the point where someone who really worries about profit and loss is then suddenly taking an interest in what you're doing. I think that's actually a great way of then actually thinking about some of the next generation of CMG. I encourage you to get out and start sharing some of the stories, start talking about some of the things that we're talking about here today, experience this with your friends. Take what you learn here and tell more people about that. Tell your boss about what's going on so that as CMG grows, this conference actually hopefully grows and gets larger and larger again. I'm very much kind of looking forward to that being a part. And please join me in being a bit more social about how we want to talk about impact. So I want to talk a little bit about digital transformation and what is digital transformation. Digital transformation actually has a lot to do with your customer's expectation of you. Things changed a little while ago associated with how people actually want to shop and how they actually want to do things. And yes, there is definitely now this mobile component that goes on with that. And it's not even necessarily so much about millennials anymore. Can we maybe agree that we sort of need to stop thinking about millennials and how millennials actually do things. Millennials have been in the workforce now for at least 5 years. Millennials actually have work experience in what they're doing. Millennials have certainly helped shape this technology. Gen Z is actually the new generation that is joining things. Gen Z is actually the generation that is getting into colleges and universities now. Gen Z has never heard a busy signal on a telephone. Gen Z has never had the opportunity to not have a mobile device in their hands when they instantly needed to go and look up some pieces of data associated with things. That's actually where we need to kind of really start thinking about things. I do remember hearing a busy signal. I used to actually also have that telephone that sat on my kitchen wall that had the really mega long phone call where I could talk on things and wander all about the place while I was doing something. And then you kind of went back when you were done that conversation and you hung it and you let the telephone do that whole, little spinny thing associated with it, and then you hung it back up. Whoops, I'm gonna need that later. My kids have absolutely no idea what I am talking about when they do that, because in my house, I don't even have a home phone. That's the realities of things that are going on with Gen Z, and that's really then what is now starting to change some of those customer expectations. And that is actually driving a massive change in business processes that are going on. What I'm actually seeing that is now starting to happen in information technology associated with digital transformation is huge. Digital transformation now starts to bring together things with artificial intelligence, the Internet of Things, blockchain, and the existing infrastructures that we've had in the past are not keeping up. Massive changes are coming as a result of that. And it has a lot to do with how do we live up to this new expectation of doing business. And this is where I really think CMG plays a key role associated with all of this. Because that expectation that comes about from our customers, we don't want that to actually be a CNN moment associated with things. We expect answers now. We expect that when we do something, when we go and we look at our account balance online, just as a simple example, that it's there. We don't really want that to take 2 or 3 seconds to get there. The experience that goes on with digital transformation has a lot to do with performance and has a lot to do with the computing requirements that are required to actually deliver these experiences to our customers. So this massive change that's coming about in processes has a lot to do with how your organizations will be set up to survive that next generation of business that we have. But why? What is sort of then really beginning to do that? Well, this is actually what used to drive business direction. It was all about corporations. Corporations defined the way we wanted to do business with them, right? You wanted to sign up for something at Disney for what you wanted. You did it the way Disney wanted. You wanted to, get a mortgage associated with things the way you wanted to with your bank. Your bank defined the way that you would do business for them. That has now actually radically changed. And the corporation isn't so much now necessarily involved with setting out those directions, because it's as simple as one person picking up their mobile phone and tweeting something, saying something on some Yelp review that goes viral, that all of a sudden has tens of thousands of people behind it. Digital transformation impacts not only our way that we actually do business with a brand, but also how that brand responds to what's actually going out. And it can start with actually something that's really simple. We all have already engaged in digital transformation probably in years and not necessarily been as aware of the fact that we did that. Many of us probably traveled, right, to come here to Seattle. How many people in the room walked into a travel agency and said, yeah, I'd like to fly to Seattle. Can you please tell me what's the most efficient way to go there? One person, there's always one person that does that. That's amazing. I don't even know where you can go and find a travel agency this day, but where you live, it's there. In Rome. I think the last physical travel agency is actually in Rome. Many of us probably went online and we bought that ticket, right, associated with things. And many of us probably went to a website that was actually the website that was owned by the airline and bought the ticket that way for what we actually want to do. That's a great example of how digital transformation changed the way we do business and how we travel. And that's just only going to continue more and more. Many things have really changed and changed for the better. And now people can drive that business direction, whether they shop online, whether they shop with a mobile device, or whether they actually go into the store. The experience that they have that they want becomes part of the shopping journey that they're using. And it becomes part of the data that they need to make that happen. And it's everything from how they get up in the morning and think about how they want to do business with you to the point where they're actually done. They can do things that will influence the way our companies and our brands want to do business with these people by just a simple state of communication for what they want to do. By connecting us in different ways and shapes and forms, I can talk about my experience that I'm having here at the Hyatt, for example, through some form of social media. I've got connections to hundreds of people. Those hundreds of people have connections to hundreds of people. And in a very quick amount of time, thousands of people can be aware as to whether or not my experience here with the Hyatt is simple, is good, is bad, whatever. And I can start all of that with a device in the palm of my hand. That is why digital transformation becomes really important to people that we have. How did we actually get here, though? So let's just kind of stop and step back in time here for just a moment. Who remembers this? Yeah, sure, exactly. I remember it too. This is Netscape Navigator for what we have. This is where it all started, right? The internet was created way back when, and someone said, you know what, actually finding the information that we need is really kind of difficult. What if we put some form of a GUI of a front end, in front of what we had, and that made actually getting access to the information much easier. But in order to do that, you needed to actually sit at your computer, right, and do that. This was a desktop application that existed when it first went and was available to you. And then shortly after that, the mobile age began. Because then a few people kind of got together when smartphones were coming out, and they went, what would actually be really even more cool is instead of me going back to my desk and looking up the information that I need, what if I actually did that from the palm of my hand? And the mobile age began. The next thing that then became about that was the connected age then began too, right? Now that I've got this device that's in my hand where I can get information, now I wanted to connect with my peers. Now I wanted to know what happens does Clive like what it is that I'm currently looking for? Does John like what it is that I'm currently looking for? I wanted to connect to the people that I have to do things, and that then kind of gave the notion that soon after that, everyone was connected. It went on like wildfire, and it didn't matter if you were old or if you were young or even if you were a senior citizen. Even my mom is on Facebook. Even she is connected. You know what my mom did the other day? She skipped the dishes. It doesn't matter how old you are or how young you are. In this day and age of digital transformation, there is an expectation that commerce is as simple as picking up a device and doing what I need for the whole experience right in my hand. And then that experience needs to go from one form of being a physical interaction in a store or doing something online or being starting the actual commerce through a mobile device that you have. It doesn't matter if you're old or you're young. It doesn't matter what generation you actually belong to. This new expectation of commerce and digital transformation is driving everything about that. And then soon after that, everyone became special. Everyone wanted to be the first one to tweet about something, to put something up on Facebook, to put something on LinkedIn and get the likes, right? That then was what became cool. If I didn't like my experience in doing something, I wanted to post about it, and I wanted my friends to commiserate with me in an open forum for doing things. Digital transformation drove a lot of that, and it's what forced commerce to then actually find a way to respond to that and be able to respond quickly. Except they couldn't, because they didn't have the IT infrastructure that was allowing them to do that. They didn't have the data at their fingertips to be able to allow them to make the changes that were required to respond to the issues that were being placed. And most times when I've gone and I've talked to brands about things, they're aware of the fact that the way that they're doing business today is not exactly the best way to do business. There isn't too many people that work that actually rub their hands together at night and go, yeah, we really messed with our customers big time. People want to change. They want to do things. They want to be able to respond. And when the digital age came about and people started feeling that they needed to do something to become special, then they started to actually recognize that with that specialness comes expectations. Welcome to our new digital economy. Things now move at such a pace and at such a speed associated with things that really the best way that we, as members of brands that deliver things to them, is to have a flexible enough IT infrastructure to respond to those changes, to do things quickly, to understand that the expectations around our customers that we have today may not necessarily be the same expectation that they have tomorrow. Because it's as simple as one person saying, I didn't like that, and it's as simple as one person picking up their phone and filming it, filming a person getting dragged off of a plane. Next thing you know, you're on the front page news associated with things. Those CNN moments that Brian talked about from before have a lot to do with digital transformation. People now dictate what is the experience that they actually want. And then when everyone starts to behave in a mode where they're special, every experience that they have must be special. There must be ways of then actually taking the different experiences that they have and making that be a unique and singular experience, whether it's something that begins with a mobile phone that ultimately transcends into a brick and mortar, or that begins with an online environment. Those experiences that we have need data to actually fuel them. And really what we're trying to talk about here is, how do I deliver that experience? How do I deliver the consistent enough experience to my shoppers that they can actually respond to what it is that I'm doing? Well, you need to do that by linking together multiple different platforms, by looking at the data that you have and creating that flexible infrastructure. But where do you even begin? Because in today, the world of comparison that we have that actually pulls many of these things together makes it very simple for individual shoppers to go and talk about their experiences, to find the things that they want, and to have things ready and waiting for them. And even in today's world, what happens more and more is you have unfair comparisons that come about. You know, if we were actually talking about, different ways to come about, being created here to do something, there's a way that many of us could have come here. We couldn't have chosen to fly on United Airlines. Anyone here from United Airlines? I know the Southwest Airlines person is here, so I'm going to pick on. Beg your pardon? No. Or what if it was actually possible to do that on a Disney cruise line? How many of you thought of the incident that happened to United Airlines some 2 years ago associated with an unfortunate incident with United Airlines? No. United breaks guitars. It changed, there was a song about that, and it actually influenced the stock price of United Airlines that they have. There was an incident where a doctor was already in his seat, legally, contractually lived up to the fulfillments that were required by United's carrier tickets, and was still dragged off that plane associated with doing things. That happened 2 years ago. United had a brilliant opportunity to take advantage of digital transformation and customer expectations for things. They could have turned flying on United Airlines to something as wonderful, I've never actually done it, but cruising on Disney cruise lines associated with things. They didn't. Missed the opportunity. Did they do that intentionally? Probably not, actually. Jimmy Fallon was making fun of United Airlines. This was front page news for quite a while associated with things for what they needed to do. One of the key reasons why United Airlines couldn't do that, and probably still even exists today, is United Airlines doesn't have the flexible IT infrastructure that's required to then make the changes associated with developing a new digital infrastructure. And I don't get it. Because earlier on, I talked as well about how, many of us that were here, we didn't walk into a brick and mortar travel agency to do something. We started our customer journey for flying online or with a mobile device. What a great opportunity to then integrate things together of what I actually wanted to do. How about greeting me with, Allan, love to help you fly to Seattle. Here's the weather. Do you know the traffic on the way to the airport is going to be particularly heavy? Maybe you want to leave 15 minutes earlier for what you have. Something incredibly simple that would make a world of difference associated with, traveling and probably wouldn't have actually began to paint United Airlines in a different world. In this day of doing things, expectations are changing and changing all the time. And I mentioned them a little bit earlier on when I was in the panel session that Amanda had set up, and I think it has a lot to do with these guys, Starbucks. You know, they have changed the way that personally I wait for coffee. You know, I don't wait for coffee anymore. And that's now the new reality of what it is that we have, that expectation of how we want to do things. Starbucks kind of knows what I want, and they make it available to me. And what do you mean I can order my coffee online and have my coffee waiting for me, yet I can't order the pair of jeans that I want from, you know, my favorite brand and have those ready and available to me? I had an unfortunate incident where, yes, I recognize I'm probably not wearing the best shoes. I am probably one of the world's most unlucky guys. I had a pair of shoes that I was going to wear with this, and as I was pulling them out of my suitcase, I don't know how it happened, the side of my shoes somehow got intertwined with the zipper on my suitcase, and I literally gashed open the side of my shoes that I had. So I was like, so I wanted to then, hopefully go and find myself a pair of shoes that I could actually use just prior to coming on here, because I didn't want to necessarily wear my comfy shoes that I wear for when I travel. And I went to 2 men's shoe stores just prior to coming here. Not one of those men's shoe stores had the type of shoes that I wanted in my size. But you know, at that point in time, I would have probably given almost my right finger for being able to find a pair of men's shoes in my size that I could order and have them ready for me to go and just pick up and then come out and do that. I wanted the coffee experience for my shoes that I needed, because I needed that because I was in a hurry, because I was trying to get ready for everything that we have. Tesla has radically changed the way that we buy cars. I'm sure many of you here buy a car, need to do something. How many of you, when it comes that time to buy a car, go, yeah, I'm going to go to the dealership, and that experience at the dealership is going to be awesome? Yeah, not a single hand went up. I have the same thing. Tesla radically changed that, right? You think about what you want with a Tesla, you go into a dealership for what you have. There's one car that's sitting there now, maybe the 2 or 3 models that they have, but you're greeted, you sit down in a nice sort of friendly environment, they give you coffee, you talk about the car, you schedule yourself a test drive. They radically changed that whole scary experience of going and driving, setting up a test drive and going and buying a car. They made it fun and interactive and interesting. That journey of actually buying the car was radically changed. And now once you start thinking about how the Internet of Things and different sensors and the experiences of what I have, then the knowledge of what I have and what I like could then be applied into some of these transactions. Excuse me. In the eyes of the consumer, this is all the same. And you know what, from an IT perspective for what we have, I'm hoping you're all starting to recognize with me too that this is all the same. This is all about making data available and having data respond in a performance-oriented way to create a transaction that actually simplifies that transaction. For many of us in the room, for what we have, for when we talk about something like this, it might sound scary, it might sound Big Brother-ish, but that Gen Z example that I talked about before, that millennial example, they like that. They think that that's interesting. They think that that's getting to know them, that showing that you know them, being able to know them, enable them, show them that you know them is what they want. That's how they relate to the brands that they have. This experience is the same. The IT infrastructure required to deliver it is the same. This is why you need to digitally transform. And this is why I actually also think organizations like this are kind of important, because it can actually help bring us together, because where do you even begin? Well, it starts with the customer. So it was kind of interesting in the panel that we had a little bit earlier on that there was kind of this notion that I think was a little bit of a theme where we talked a little bit about how it wasn't so much about technology, was actually about people and relating data to people for what we have. The technology was kind of secondary to that whole consideration that you have. That's true. That's true with digital transformation. It starts with the customer. It also ends with the customer. Companies that are doing this and doing this right create that new individualized customer experience that you have by thinking about the journey from the time it begins to the process of actually completing the transaction that you have to when that transaction actually ends. And they do that by typically using data or creating a single user profile. So it's this data type that then begins to kind of interconnect these experiences for what you have. So you need to kind of understand a little bit more about your journey. You need to do a step before you even begin to think about data and IT infrastructure and stuff. And then you can kind of start looking about how you interconnect some of these experiences together. So if I'm shopping online, I need that customer journey to be as simple and work the same kind of way as when I'm doing things online, or if I'm doing things by connecting things all together in different ways and shapes and forms. Sorry, there was a build there I think that got missed. But it's a connective tissue that then kind of goes, that sort of links all different things that we have together. I want to talk about a right customer experience. Cabela's. People sort of know who this brand is, right? This has little to do with technology at this point in time. Cabela's has thought about that customer journey right from the time that you begin, when you wake up in the morning and you decide about how you actually want to go and buy something. The parking spots are a little bit wider. They're a little bit longer, because most of the people that will probably be coming to Cabela's are probably showing up in a pickup truck. You know, there are people that are interested in sports. When you walk into a Cabela's, most of the time, you'll walk by a fish tank, right? And kind of get you in the mood of fishing. Usually you'll also be faced with, you know, some taxidermy animals and stuff like that. Do you know it's actually intentional that when you walk through a Cabela's store, you never really walk in a straight line? You typically kind of snake your way through things. And now start to pay attention for this. You will notice that there are different heights associated with how they actually lay out their clothes and things like that, because it's like walking through the forest. For people that are playing things that are interested in sports, hunting, fishing, it's like you're creeping through the forest for what you're doing. That's very intentional. It's putting you in the mood for what you're actually doing for when you're in somewhere like Cabela's. And now when you're in there, you have that experience of being able to find people. You can then find the experts for what you want. You walk your way back to the cash. The cashier is probably going to ask you questions about what it is that you're buying. You're going to set up some some form of camaraderie for what they're doing as well. All of that's very intentional in the way they're doing things. That's thinking about the right customer experience. I've picked a little bit on airlines. This is an example of an airline, and it was my own right customer experience. So I'm Canadian. We don't really have a lot of choice in who we actually fly with, so I fly a lot with Air Canada. This was something that Air Canada did that I actually thought was really kind of neat. It was one time when I was flying from Ottawa to Toronto, and then Toronto to Munich. And Air Canada met me as I got off the plane in Toronto with a sign, and then they actually brought me to this waiting car, this BMW 7 Series car that was there, and they literally chauffeured me from my gate to the next plane that I had. And for any of you that have been in the Toronto airport, going from the domestic gates to the international gates is about a 3-kilometer hike. It's a long walk that you need to do. Now, yes, you can use walkways and all that kind of stuff, but still, it's a long walk. The fact that they greeted me, said, "Thank you very much for being a longtime loyal customer with Air Canada, Mr. Zander. We want to actually take you directly to your plane," which they did. I then walked up the stairs of the gate, you know, much like the way a baggage handler would do. I went on the plane where the stewards were there. They greeted me. They said, "Thank you very much for being a longtime Air Canada customer." They gave me some champagne. They gave me some special snacks and stuff like that. They made me feel really special associated with what I did. Just a simple piece of data. I was on the plane. I was going. Say hi to Mr. Zander and do something special. This event happened 2 years ago. I'm still talking about it today. Some of the power associated with digital transformation and technology. To do this, first comes your platform, and then you need to start thinking about the tools that interact. And this is then an interesting thing that comes about. Did you know that there are more sensors on the planet today than people? And it's not like there's 4 sensors on the planet today more than people. There are 16 times the amount of sensors on the planet than people. Start to think about what happens when 16 times the sensors that are on the planet with people need to interact with all of the other different ways that are going on to start to make decisions associated with things. If that's not a performance and capacity management problem, I'm not sure what actually is. And how some of these different tools and things interact, people are just going to get more and more creative. If you think that things like Amazon or Alexa or whatnot are new forms of Internet of Things, I would say that's chapter 1 of this whole digital transformation world. I think we're actually beginning chapter 2 today. The things that we will envision that we will do with these sensors and these products and these tools will be things that will blow our minds away. 5G technology is something that's starting to come into the cell phone world today. 5G has 5 times the amount of bandwidth capacity associated with it with 4G. It will make providing things with shopping, with getting access to media, with doing it probably in a virtual reality mode, far more easier than anything that we have seen in the past today. And we will do that in the palm of our hands. That's why some of these tools are so important. I've talked a lot about maybe some big ideas that we have here, and I know that that can sometimes seem rather overwhelming. So if you want to actually do something, you want to start small with a project for what we have, how about just simply knowing someone's name? It kind of gets past that problem that you have that I mentioned earlier on in the panel session that we have of what do you do when all you have is first name, last name, and maybe an email address. You do this. You find a simple way of leveraging some of that data to just simply say hi and greet that person by name. And if you do that on a mobile device, just think about my travel example that I had before and think about United Airlines. Imagine how interesting it would be and what would happen in some of United Airlines' world if, as you got on that plane, it said, "Hi, Allan. I hope you enjoy your flight on United 792, whatever we have." You'd probably react and go, "That's kind of cool." Something really simple that you can probably do to enable things that you have just by simply starting with knowing someone's name. The hardest part, though, associated with doing this seldom has to do with anything with technology. It actually has to do with delivering the experience. And this is where then another aspect of digital transformation that I think we sometimes forget about links all aspects of the customer experience together. Whether it's different processes that you have or different systems that you need to do things, we tend to spend a lot of time thinking about the shopper that we have. And we use these technologies and we integrate all of these different tools and things around to make the shopper's life easier. And yes, that certainly makes a lot of sense for what we need to do and for how we actually want to deliver these experiences. But we can actually take advantage of technology because making a product that is then a simpler and easier thing to be able to find and get access to is one thing, but there's the service aspect that goes to that, right? There's these guys, McDonald's. These guys have also kind of taken that notion of products and services and integrated that in such a way that that experience is relatively consistent. Whether I want a Big Mac here in Seattle, or I want a Big Mac in Ottawa, or I want a Big Mac in Singapore, chances are that Big Mac is going to be exactly the same. I know what I am going to get. That experience for me is defined and it's consistent and it's reliable for what we have. It's one thing to do that with a product. It's another thing to do that with service. And to unify the way in such a way that the training associated with service is also part of digital transformation. And guess what? This is one of the secret things that you have that you need to run to your bosses and talk to about how performance and optimization can really help for what you have. It will make the delivery of service a consistent thing for your brands that you have. By being able to do things like script store clerks in such a way to say, there's Mr. Zander that's in your store right now, thank him for buying the white shirt, suggest a new pair of shoes that you would have because he hasn't bought some in a little while. That's the type of thing that these technologies and things will be able to do. And it's interesting because service is usually the fall down point for a lot of experiences that we have when we shop, right? It isn't necessarily the product. Think about a car, right, that you have. Generally speaking, your car more or less does what you expect it to do. But I'd be willing to bet, if I did a poll that was here, 80% of us, if you had an issue with the brand of automobile that you drove, regardless of whatever brand that was, the issue that you would have would actually be related to your last service experience that you had in a dealership. If you can make that service consistent and you can make that service reliable for what you need, you will solve a lot of the digital transformation issues that go on. So in the end, where do we kind of go from here? Well, you can definitely create a goal. You can assess your systems. You can form a plan. This is all the stuff that many of us engineers and computer scientists people like to do, right? We're looking for making something that's a simple, easy way to have something come about that we can rally around to do things. But I'd like you to actually spend a little bit of time before you get into that plan, thinking about some of the economics associated with what I'm talking about here. Those economics are very real. They create the real reasons as to why you do this. Because believe it or not, many people actually like to come into your store, just as an example for this. And when they do, on average, they actually spend about 20% more. And why would you actually do this? Well, because on average, it's going to increase your revenue by about 27% in less than 1 year. And why do you want to actually worry about creating your journey? Because on average, almost a 68% increase in store traffic will experience this and drive them back to the store. Think about what I just said. If you want to ever have any issues around how you will fund a performance and capacity management organization for what you have, this is it right here. 30% increase in revenue in less than 1 year. If any of you are in the retail industry, I just told you, it is February and you are on the cusp of creating the single best Black Friday Christmas sales thing that you would have by simply looking at the ways that you can use data and make that available to you. That is huge. I'm not making these things up. These come from a fellow by the name of Doug Stevens. He's a retail prophet. Gartner has looked at some of this. Forbes has looked at this. This is why digital transformation is growing things in a huge way. If I can get more people to walk through a store associated with creating a new journey, that has nothing to do with technology. That has more to do with how I set up my store to actually look for things, and in so doing, they're probably going to buy 20% more, and then on average, that's going to lead to one of the single best Q4s that we will see in the retail industry. Retail apocalypse? Who's talking about a retail apocalypse? This is a brick and mortar argument for what we have. This is massive. Still don't necessarily believe what I'm talking about? Well, another way that you can actually go and look about doing this is invent a vernacular associated for doing things. Starbucks did this, a great way associated with things. They have fun, I suppose, in how you actually want to order, your coffee. I can have a tall, that's a small tall. I still, yes, have a hard time wrapping my head around that. Or I can get myself a triple grande. I don't even know. Sometimes I'm just like coffee in the morning, and I like a black coffee. And this is part of the reason, too, why I actually started switching to the app to actually have my coffee waiting for me when I wanted to do something. Because being the fifth or sixth guy in line behind someone that's placing an order like this when all you want is just the black coffee is kind of really kind of annoying, associated with doing things. So changing your journey increases the touch points that you have. Most car transactions that we have today now have more than 900 touch points. 5 or 6 years ago, associated with how you would buy a car, you'd walk into a dealership maybe 6 to 10 times before you actually went to purchase a car. Now, on average, most people, when they go and buy a car, they walk into a dealership once, maybe twice. They've already done a fair amount of the research that they have. Think about changing that journey that I talked about before too. I can buy my sports gear from someone like REI, where I'm essentially in a gym, right? I can try the sports gear that I want. If I'm interested in rock climbing, I can try to rock climb. If I'm interested in playing basketball for doing things, I can try and play basketball. I can get used to the components and the products and things that I want to buy just by the way they've changed their store. If any of you are interested in or have ever looked at Sonos gear for what we have, Sonos has started doing these kind of pop-up store concepts in malls for what they have, and it's very much like a living room. You go in and you literally sit in a nice leather couch for what you have, and there's multiple different Sonos products there, and someone will explain that to you, and it's like you're in your own living room. If I want to buy a coffee, well, it's like I'm sitting in a family room associated with doing that too. People like Starbucks don't necessarily create like a coffee shop sort of feel. A coffee shop, even in today's vernacular of doing things, doesn't necessarily imply a restaurant in our head. If I said a coffee shop, you probably had something in mind that was very comfortable to go and sit in. It was a place where you could probably do work. It was a place where you could use free Wi-Fi and you could sit and you could have yourself a coffee. Digital transformation that we have, I think everyone should be on the digital transformation bandwagon, but just start small for what you have. I've talked about some big plans. The plans will evolve. Your customers will help define what this experience and this journey is for you and for your brand. You're better off by actually starting small and rolling out some technology. Think of that example that I made before of just simply being able to greet someone by name for what you have. Then start to think about the data. Because make no bones about it, data really is a very important thing for what you have. Data is going to drive a lot of the decisions that go into how you use customer journeys and use them to your advantage. There's no doubt about it. But many of you have probably been in different big data projects before. And how many of us actually were answering the same questions as we got to the end of our big data journey that we thought were the questions that we needed to answer when we started our big data journey? That changes. That changes all the time. You need that flexibility. Don't start big, because chances are you're probably going to have a time where you're going to be iterating a little bit upon the data that you have. Why? Everyone is special. Everyone wants to feel that they have that need to talk about the experience that they have, to feel that the way that I'm doing commerce with you is something that I can relate to you and relate to you specifically for what we have. That's what this is all about. I want to leave you with a closing thought. This is my daughter. Her name's Callista, and luckily Callista is okay with me presenting this photo to her, of her up here to do that. She knew that I was doing this. She's obviously a little bit of a goof, and that's okay. Kevin had mentioned something like this as we were talking about how to transform CMG. And he talked a lot about autonomous vehicles and this whole notion of sensors and things like that. This is where I think we, as people that are interested in performance and capacity management, need to realize just exactly what it is that we're doing here. There could very well be a time when, just like I said, there's more sensors on the road. And Callista is currently 17, so I don't know, but I mentioned before somewhere on on the panel that I predict that should Callista ever have a child, that chances are she will go to the hospital in an autonomous vehicle associated with what we need, because that will be much safer than her or her significant other, husband, whatever the term will be at that point in time for that relationship. Someone's going to drive her to the hospital. And I actually don't think it's going to be a human being. I think it's going to be software that's going to drive her to the hospital associated with doing that. Want her to make it. Want her to get there and be there safe, associated with that journey for what we have. All of that sensor data that will be required to do that, with all of the tens of thousands of autonomous vehicles that will also be on the road. That's why what we do matters. So if you don't necessarily want to do it just for Callista, think about the other people in your lives that are going to be kind of like your Callista that's out there. Performance and capacity management matters. Thanks very much for your time. My name's Allan Zander. Very much enjoyed talking to you.
Hi, I'm Andre Bondi. I'm concerned about the asymmetric burden that's put on the user by all these changes. And I think actually that the reason United gets away with what it's doing is not that its IT system is backward or whatever. I think it's because it's one member of a very small oligopoly, and therefore really doesn't have an incentive to make things better. And that's been my experience with the other airlines as well. I can't speak to Southwest because I've never flown on them. But I had an experience with Delta canceling a flight, and they had 4 people to process 300 passengers, and you don't need to be a performance person to figure out that if it's 15 minutes a person, you're not going to be out of there before 6 in the morning. Right. And we weren't. And their server crashed, their apps were down, and all the rest of that. So this transformation seems wonderful on its face, but I don't feel as optimistic about it as you do, because of the asymmetry imposed by the centrality. I'm getting older, and my eyesight makes it hard to read these small phones. I have to buy an expensive phone to hold all those apps to cope with the transformation. I really don't think this is so wonderful. What will the vendors do in order to make this experience better, and to feel that they're obliged to make it better? I just don't see that happening.
Good point. I'll maybe give you perhaps a blunt answer. I don't think they care what you or I think, because we're already too old. They care what Callista thinks. They're building applications in this point in time for that Gen Z, for that millennial. They don't have issues with their eyesight. They want to do things online. They will make changes that will happen by getting together and using different social media. We are of a generation where we're scared about that technology.
Old and young people were just as affected by that lousy server.
I totally agree. But this has a lot to do with brand and brand loyalty, and being able to develop that brand loyalty. The value of future revenue that will come by creating a solution that is maybe for you or for me that we have is far less than the amount of revenue in generating something that will make Callista be loyal to Southwest Airlines or United. And yeah, there is people crunching the numbers that way.
With an aging demographic, that's interesting.
So, dear Allan, you have been a powerful driving force behind aligning CMG with its new digital transformation message and persona. And I wonder if you want to share your thoughts on how we're doing so far and where we should go next.
Sure. How we're doing? To be honest, I actually think we're doing okay. This is new. This is a new way of thinking about commerce and a new way of thinking about how we're going to use data to empower the rules associated with commerce for what we have. I'm not sure there's necessarily any organizations like CMG that are spending a lot of time thinking about that right now. I think that will come. So I think CMG is right to tackle this, and we're tackling it like many other organizations that are faced with a crossroads in what they're doing are looking at these forms of decisions that need to be made. Of, you know, if I think of CMG the way I initially knew of CMG, it was a mainframe performance and optimization organization. I think when you look at digital transformation, you still will have a requirement to understand where that system of record is and to be able to access that system of record. And very likely when you are dealing with large commerce, that system of record is going to be on a mainframe. So there still will be a requirement to have the mainframe be a fundamental part of CMG, no doubt about it. And I'm also very much of the opinion that I will see mainframes on this planet up to the point that I retire and I'm no longer doing things. And probably they will also be around when Callista is midway through her career. I don't see them going away anytime soon. I'm lucky in data kinetics in that I've actually also now met a number of different IBM friends associated with different projects that I'm working on with IBM, and I think IBM feels the same about that. I think, though, there's an element of digital transformation and this new data that's kind of coming that just goes now bigger than the mainframe. That sensor statistic that I talked about before of, you know, there's more sensors on the planet than there are people, and we're going to use that to compute things associated with autonomous vehicles is probably one of the most things that is the easier thing that we can all identify with now. But I actually also think there will be applications around that that we haven't even thought of yet. And they will have the impact of being able to protect lives for what we have. I think we're right to be thinking about how do we compute that and compute that effectively as well.
Thank you.
This will be our last question comment.
It's more of a comment. It's more of a comment than a question. Along the lines with what you're saying there, I hope that the next one that they develop or integrate with sensors are traffic lights.
Yes.
Absolutely agree. Thank you, Allan.
Thank you very much.